She was the quietest woman at that wedding. No tears, no trembling hands, just still. Her husband just publicly claimed another woman as his. Her own family looked away, but silence, they would soon learn, was not weakness. It was the sound of $20 billion waiting to speak. Lenora was 38 years old on the night of her sister's wedding. She was the kind of woman who walked into a room and didn't demand it. She didn't need the attention. She had dark brown skin that looked warm even in cold light, and eyes that took in everything without giving much away. She dressed well but never flashily. She spoke when she had something to say. And when she didn't have something to say, she was comfortable in a silence that made other people nervous. That was always her gift. And for a long time, that gift was also her curse, because people confused her peace for absence. They confused her calm for emptiness. They mistook the fact that she wasn't yelling for the fact that she had nothing to say. Marcus Washington made that mistake more than anyone. Marcus was her husband of 11 years, 44 years old, broad-shouldered, with the kind of confidence that fills a room before a man even opens his mouth. He was handsome in a way he knew too well. He dressed sharp, talked smooth, and carried himself like someone who believed the world owed him something. And more than that, like someone who believed that the owing was permanent, like the debt never expired. He had grown up being told he was exceptional by people who loved him too carelessly, and that kind of love, poured on a man without measure or condition, doesn't always build character. Sometimes it just builds appetite. And for a long time, mostly because of Lenora, the world actually delivered. They arrived at Gloria's wedding together, the way they always arrived at things together, side by side, but in recent months, not quite touching, not quite reaching. There was a distance between them that had grown so slowly, neither of them had officially named it, though Lenora had felt it for over a year. She had brought it up once. Marcus had told her she was imagining things. She had gone quiet after that. Not because she believed him, but because she already understood something he didn't, that some conversations are only worth having with people who are ready to hear them. The wedding hall was beautiful. Gloria had always had taste, expensive taste that she couldn't always afford, but on this particular evening someone else was footing the bill, so the room was draped in gold and ivory fabric, with tall floral arrangements on every table and candles floating in crystal bowls. It smelled like gardenias and something warm. Lenora sat at the family table in a deep burgundy dress and held a glass of water in both hands, watching her younger sister walk down the aisle with a slow, soft smile. Gloria was radiant, 29 years old and glowing in a way that Lenora recognized, the glow of someone who believed, at least in that moment, that everything was going to be fine. Lenora wanted that to be true. Marcus sat beside her wearing a charcoal suit, his phone face down on the table. He checked it twice during the ceremony and once during the first toast. Lenora noticed. She always noticed. She simply said nothing. The reception began the way receptions do, with music and movement and people finding their footing between the formal part and the free part. Glasses clinked. Children chased each other around table legs. The DJ tested his levels, and Lenora sat quietly, watching the room, holding the stem of her champagne glass, without drinking from it. Then Marcus stood up. It was not his moment. Nobody had invited him to stand, but Marcus had always believed that the right moment was whatever moment he decided to make his. He tapped his glass with a small silver spoon, the kind of gesture that commands a room before anyone knows why. And the noise around them dimmed. People turned. They assumed a toast. Maybe something sweet from the groom's table, something small. What came next was not small. Marcus smoothed his jacket and smiled the wide, rehearsed smile Lenora had seen him practice in bathroom mirrors. He said he had an announcement, something he had been meaning to make for some time, something he should have been brave enough to say much sooner. He said it with the tone of a man confessing a heroism, not a betrayal, and then he turned his head toward the back of the hall. From the far end of the room, between two tall pillar candles, a woman walked forward. Her name was Tiffany, 32 years old. She was wearing a champagne-colored dress that cost more than most people in that room, made in a month. She walked like someone who had practiced the walk, who had imagined this exact moment and decided how her shoulders would sit and how her chin would angle. She walked like she was arriving somewhere she deserved. Marcus took her hand. In front of the wedding guests, in front of the hired photographer who was still shooting because he didn't know what else to do, in front of Gloria, the bride, who stood 10 feet away and pressed her lips together, in front of Lenora's mother and her aunts and her cousins, and every person who had known Lenora since she was a small girl, with thick plaits and scraped knees. Marcus looked out at the room and said that Tiffany was the woman he intended to marry, that he had already filed the paperwork, that he was sorry it had come to this, but he believed in being honest, and this was his truth. He said the word truth like it cost him something to give it, like honesty was the sacrifice, not the 11 years he was dismantling in real time. The room went the kind of quiet that doesn't have a bottom. And then 3 things happened to Lenora at exactly the same moment. She looked at Marcus, her husband, the man she had supported and believed in, and worked double shifts for during the years before anyone else believed in him, standing in front of a room full of people, holding another woman's hand. She looked at her mother, seated 2 chairs away at the same table, and watched the woman drop her eyes to the tablecloth, her mother's hands folded in her lap. She did not look up. She did not move. And in that stillness, Lenora understood that her mother already knew, and had known, and had chosen not to say a word. She looked at Gloria, her sister, the bride, the woman whose wedding this was supposed to be, and caught her eyes across the room for just 1 second. 1 second was enough, because Gloria looked at her with an expression that wasn't surprise. It was something closer to apology, the guilty, sideways kind, the kind that lives in a person who made a decision a long time ago and has been hoping they wouldn't have to see its consequences up close. She knew too. They all knew. 3 betrayals. 1 moment. No warning. Except all the warnings Lenora had already felt in her bones and chosen to sit with quietly the way she sat with everything. Lenora set her water glass down on the table with both hands. She did not stand up. She did not raise her voice. She did not cry, though the room was silently waiting to see if she would, the way people always wait to see if a quiet woman will finally break. She straightened her back slightly. She breathed once, slowly, through her nose, and then she reached up, almost without thinking, and touched the collar of her burgundy dress, just briefly, just for a moment, feeling the small gold pendant that hung beneath the fabric against her skin. A compass rose, thin and warm and there. Tiffany, from across the room, looked directly at Lenora and smiled. It was a slow smile, the kind designed to wound, designed to say, "I have what you had, and you cannot touch me." Lenora looked at her, not through her, not away from her, at her, with calm, level eyes that didn't flicker, and then she looked away, not in defeat, with the simple disinterest of someone who has already moved past a thing that hasn't caught up to itself yet. The narrator would later say that that was the most powerful moment in the whole room that night, not the announcement, not Tiffany's entrance, but a woman who had just been publicly destroyed sitting completely still and choosing, in that stillness, not to give anyone the satisfaction of her collapse, because Lenora Washington had already made peace with this evening, She had known it was coming, and she had already decided what came next. To understand that, we have to go back. Way back. Back before Marcus. Back before Atlanta. Back to a small brick house on a quiet street in Birmingham, Alabama, in the summer of 1998. Lenora was 12 years old and sitting on the front porch with her grandfather, Elder Cornelius Washington. He was a large man, broad and slow-moving, with enormous hands and soft eyes that always looked like they were holding something warm. He was the kind of man who didn't speak much, but when he did, you felt it in your chest long after the words had stopped. He smelled like cedar and coffee and something earthy. He was, in every way that mattered, the steadiest presence Lenora had ever known. That summer, Elder Cornelius had started reading to her from a small leather journal. Old and worn at the corners, the pages brown at the edges, the handwriting inside tight and careful and full of intention. It was the journal of her great-grandmother, Adeline Washington, a woman Lenora had only ever known through photographs and stories. A small woman in a white dress, looking directly at the camera like she wasn't afraid of anything in the world. Adeline had built a business from nothing in the 1940s in the American South as a black woman, against every law and custom and institution that said she couldn't, that said she had no right, that said her silence was the natural condition of her life. She built a real estate holdings company from a single lot of land she had inherited from her own father. She was patient and deliberate and ruthless in the quiet way that only truly certain people can be ruthless. She never raised her voice. She never had to. The work spoke. The journal described transactions, meetings, men who tried to undo her at every corner, and how she had moved around each obstacle not with force, but with strategy, with a stillness so deep it unsettled people who expected her to panic. Page after page of a woman who refused to be defined by what others decided she was worth. A woman who knew, without anyone ever having to confirm it for her, exactly what she was capable of building. Elder Cornelius read to Lenora from that journal on the porch, his low voice moving through Adeline's words like river water over stone. And Lenora listened with her chin in her hands and her eyes on the front yard. When he finished, he closed the journal and set it on his knee and looked at her for a long moment. He said, "Baby, the ones who move quiet are the ones who move things." Lenora didn't fully understand it at 12, but she filed it somewhere deep, the way children file the things adults say that they know they'll need later. Then Elder Cornelius reached into the pocket of his flannel shirt and pulled out a pendant on a thin gold chain. Small, delicate. A compass rose, its 8 points fanned out like a tiny sun, the gold worn soft and smooth from decades of handling. He told her it had belonged to Adeline, that Adeline had worn it every day of her adult life, that it had traveled with her through every quiet battle she had ever fought and won. He held it out to Lenora and said, "When you feel lost, this will remind you which direction you already know." Lenora took it with both hands. She turned it over once, feeling the weight of it, heavier than it looked, the way important things usually are. She put it on right there on the porch. She had not taken it off since. 26 years later, at a wedding in Atlanta, it rested beneath the collar of a burgundy dress and pressed its warmth against the chest of a woman who had never forgotten what her grandfather told her on that porch. Lenora came to Atlanta at 23 for work. She was sharp with numbers, had always been, and found her way into a mid-size financial firm as a junior analyst. She was the kind of employee who came in early and left late and never made a fuss about it. She learned everything she could about everything she could reach. She was quiet in meetings, but her memos were always the clearest ones in the room, and slowly, steadily, she built a reputation for precision and reliability. She met Marcus at 27. He was charming in the way that people who have decided they deserve good things are always charming. Big smile, easy laugh, a way of making you feel like you were the most interesting person he had ever met. He had an idea for a business, a logistics startup. Early days, no funding, just vision and energy and a willingness to bet on himself. He talked about it the way men talk about dreams they actually believe in. And Lenora, who had grown up watching her great-grandmother's legacy and learning what it looked like to build from nothing, recognized something genuine in him. She believed in him. That was real. It was never fake. She worked double shifts during the years his company was fragile. She covered their rent for 8 months when his early investors pulled out. She managed their household finances with the same precision she brought to her job, stretching money in ways Marcus never fully understood or asked about. She built vendor relationships on his behalf when he was too proud to make certain calls himself. She was the quiet infrastructure of his life, and he accepted it the way people accept things that have always been there, without looking at it too carefully, without naming it, without gratitude that had to be tended. His mother, Beverly, had never warmed to Lenora. Beverly was a woman who valued loudness in women. Not rude loudness, but the decorative kind, the social kind, the kind that performed devotion and admiration in public and made a man feel large. Lenora didn't perform anything. Beverly read that as coldness, as arrogance, as something deficient. She told Marcus early on, in words that were polite on the surface and cutting underneath, that Lenora was too quiet to know what she wanted. Marcus, who was still enough in love at that point to disagree, told his mother she was wrong, but he remembered her saying it, and over the years, as Beverly repeated her version of Lenora in his ear in small, steady doses, the words began to sink. His brother Darnell was less careful. He called Lenora too quiet to be interesting to her face once at a family dinner and laughed like it was a joke. Marcus had laughed too, just slightly, before catching himself. Lenora had smiled and passed the bread rolls. She didn't forget that laugh. She didn't bring it up. She simply added it to the growing ledger of things she knew and held without showing. Tiffany came into Marcus's life 18 months before that wedding. She arrived through his business network, introduced as a consultant, presented as professional. She was sharp in the ways Beverly appreciated, stylish, vocal, performatively warm in social settings. Beverly loved her immediately. Within 3 months, Beverly was texting Marcus about Tiffany. Within 6, she was creating situations where they were together without Lenora present. Within a year, she had fully chosen a side and was actively working toward a future that didn't include her daughter-in-law. And Gloria, Lenora's own sister, who had grown close to Marcus's family during her own wedding planning process, who had needed Marcus's business contacts for vendors, needed Beverly's social connections for the guest list, needed things that Lenora's side of the family couldn't provide as easily, and who, somewhere in the process of accepting all of that, had slowly traded her loyalty for access. She had told Marcus things Lenora said in private. She had given Beverly information. She had let herself be pulled across a line she could never fully uncross. None of them thought Lenora noticed. That was always their mistake. 3 months before Gloria's wedding on a Tuesday night in October, Lenora was working from home. She needed to print a contract for a client call the next morning. She walked to the printer in Marcus's home office, sent the print job, and waited for the machine to finish. When she pulled her documents from the tray, she noticed there were extra pages underneath, pages that had been left from an earlier print job. She almost set them aside without looking. Almost. She looked. The first page was a photograph, printed in color, slightly grainy from the home printer. Marcus and Tiffany at a restaurant Lenora recognized, seated close, laughing at something. comfortable in the way people are only comfortable when they believe no one is watching. There were more photographs. Then a document, a drafted divorce settlement, drawn up by an attorney Lenora didn't recognize. It allocated her the car, 60 days in the marital home, and a small transitional payment, 11 years. That was the value he had placed on 11 years. And then a note, handwritten. Beverly's looping, careful penmanship on cream stationery. To Marcus, it said, "She never deserved you anyway. Finish it." Lenora stood in that office for a long moment, the papers in her hand, the printer still humming as it cooled, the house around her completely silent. Then she walked slowly to the kitchen and sat down on the floor, her back against the cabinet under the sink, her knees pulled in. She reached up and held the compass rose pendant through the fabric of her shirt. Just held it. She stayed there on that kitchen floor and let herself feel the full weight of what she was holding. The betrayal of a husband, the betrayal of a mother-in-law, the slow betrayal of a sister. And she cried. Not loudly, just the kind of crying that happens when something you already knew gets confirmed. The kind that is more relief than surprise, and more grief than anger. She cried for maybe 10 minutes. Then something shifted in her face. Something settled. The way a storm doesn't so much end as reorganize itself into something more purposeful. She stopped crying. She breathed. She looked at the compass rose pendant in her hand, and she thought about Adeline, a woman who built 20 times what these people were trying to take, in 20 times the darkness, with 20 times less working in her favor. She got up off the floor. She washed her face. She went to bed. The next morning at 8:47 a.m., her phone rang from a number she didn't recognize, a New York area code. She almost let it go to voicemail. She answered. The voice on the other end was professional, measured, careful. A representative from the Washington Legal Group, a firm based in Manhattan. They were looking for a Lenora Adeline Washington, granddaughter of Elder Cornelius Washington, great-granddaughter of Adeline Washington, founder of the Washington Group, a real estate and financial holdings company established in Birmingham, Alabama in 1941. They had been attempting to locate her for several months through a process of estate verification. Elder Cornelius had passed away 2 years prior, quietly, at the age of 89, in his home in Birmingham, and in his will the entirety of the Washington Group Trust, which had been compounding in a protected legal structure since 1987, passed to his granddaughter. They needed to confirm her identity. The total estate value, as of the most recent independent valuation, was $20.3 billion. Lenora sat very still on the edge of the bed. The representative asked if she was still on the line. She said, "Yes, I'm here." She said it the way you say something when your whole life just rearranged itself around you and you need a moment to find the floor again. She said it quietly, like a woman who was already doing math in her head, already thinking, already deciding. She asked 3 questions. She wrote down 3 names and 2 addresses. She thanked the representative and told him she would be in touch within 24 hours. She ended the call and set her phone face down on the bed beside her. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She didn't call anyone. She sat for a few minutes in the morning light that came through the bedroom window, and she exhaled, slow and deep, like something that had always belonged to her, had simply found its way home. Within 48 hours, Lenora had retained her own legal team, 3 attorneys, 2 financial advisors, and a trust specialist. She flew to New York to meet in person. She did not tell Marcus. She did not tell her mother. She did not tell Gloria. She signed the documentation, completed the transfer process, and established herself as the sole principal of the Washington Group at a meeting in a 42nd floor conference room, while Marcus was at a dinner with Tiffany 2 miles away. She came home that evening and made dinner. She sat across from Marcus at the table and asked him about his day. He said it was fine. She nodded. She didn't say anything else. She didn't have to. She attended her sister's wedding 3 months later, fully prepared for exactly what happened. She had known for weeks that Marcus was planning the announcement. Her attorneys had intercepted enough to understand the shape of his plan. She had simply let it unfold because Lenora Washington understood something that Marcus and Beverly and Gloria and Tiffany had never bothered to learn about her. She knew that some confrontations land harder when you let the other person make the first move. And she was patient enough to wait. Marcus came home the night of the wedding near midnight. He had left the reception early with Tiffany, returned alone, and walked into the house expecting to find what men like him always expect after a scene like that. A woman undone. A woman in pieces. Tears and broken dishes and a desperation he could manage. Instead, the house was entirely clean. The lights were low. Lenora was seated at the dining room table in a white robe, her reading glasses on, a mug of chamomile tea beside her right hand, and a legal document in front of her. Her hair was wrapped. She looked completely rested. He started to speak. She held up one finger without looking up from the page. He stopped. She finished reading her paragraph, set the document down, removed her glasses, and folded her hands on the table. Then she looked at him. She told him the divorce filing had already been submitted, that her attorneys, not hers, had sent the paperwork through 2 days ago, and he should expect formal contact from the Washington legal group no later than Thursday. She told him that Beverly should make sure she had competent representation, because the civil suit for tortious interference in a marriage was already in preparation, and Lenora intended to see it through. She said all of this without raising her voice, without leaning forward, without any theater at all. Marcus laughed. It was the kind of laugh that comes from someone who is scared and doesn't want to show it. He told her she couldn't afford 3 attorneys on her salary. He told her the settlement was already drawn up and she should take the deal he'd offered before this got expensive. He reminded her, with the smile of a man who believes money is power and that only he had it, that she was getting the car and 60 days. He said it like he was being generous. Lenora looked at him for a moment, just looked at him. Then she reached across the table and slid one piece of paper toward him, a single page, her name at the top, a number near the bottom, a number with 11 zeros behind it. She watched his face change. She watched the smile go. She watched his eyes move over the number twice, the way eyes do when a brain refuses to accept what it's reading on the first pass. She said, "I didn't marry you for your money, Marcus. I never needed it." She stood up. She picked up her mug. She walked to the bedroom and she locked the door behind her. She finished her tea. She slept without any trouble. 2 weeks later, a formal meeting was convened at a law firm on the 40th floor of a downtown Atlanta skyscraper. Marcus's attorneys had requested a settlement conference, believing they were walking into a negotiation with a woman who had limited resources and less leverage. They brought Marcus. They brought Tiffany, who attended as a show of solidarity, or perhaps simply to witness the end of a thing she believed she had helped engineer. Lenora was already in the room when they arrived. She was seated at the head of the conference table in all black. A fitted blazer, clean lines, minimal jewelry. The compass rose pendant was visible at her collarbone for the first time. No ring. 3 attorneys flanked her left side. 2 financial advisors stood behind her, quiet and still. And to her right sat the lead partner of the Washington legal group, a woman named Diane, silver-haired and composed, whose presence in a room had the effect of lowering everyone else's temperature by several degrees. Marcus's attorney began his opening. He was 3 sentences in when Diane opened a single folder and slid it across the table in one smooth motion. The folder contained the full financial disclosure of the Washington Group: real estate holdings across 6 states, investment portfolios, international assets, trust documentation, valuation reports, all of it clean, legal, verified, and attached to one name: $20.3 billion. The attorney stopped speaking mid-sentence. He looked down at the first page. He looked up at Diane. He looked down again. His hand, which had been moving with the comfortable confidence of a man who believes he is winning, went very still on the table. Marcus looked at the folder the way a man looks at something he knows will change everything and cannot make himself open fast enough, and cannot make himself open at all. He opened it anyway. He read the first page. He read the figure. His jaw tightened in a way that people who didn't know him well might have read as composure, but Lenora, who had spent 11 years learning the geography of his face, knew it for what it was: the expression of a man whose entire internal architecture was collapsing floor by floor and who was using everything he had left just to stay upright in his chair. Beside him, Tiffany's hand, which had been resting on his forearm with the proprietary ease of someone who believed the outcome of this meeting was already settled, slowly slid off and came to rest in her own lap. She looked at the number. She looked at Lenora, and something in her face, some calculation that had been running quietly behind her eyes since the moment this chapter of her life began, reached its conclusion. Lenora spoke. She didn't raise her voice. She spoke the way Elder Cornelius had spoken on that porch in Birmingham, low and sure, and with the kind of weight that doesn't need volume to land. She said she was taking the house. She was keeping her car. She was claiming the full inheritance that was hers by blood and by law. She was asking for nothing of Marcus's, not $1 of the business she had helped build, not one asset from their marriage, nothing that had his name on it, because she had never needed any of it. She was leaving it all for him to watch dissolve on its own. She said that effective immediately, the Washington Group was donating the first $10 million of the inherited estate to 3 Black women's financial literacy foundations operating across the South. The donation was being made in the name of Adeline Washington. It had already been processed that morning. She picked up her documents. She stood. She straightened her blazer. She looked at Marcus one final time across that table. Not with anger, not with satisfaction, not with grief. With the quiet, final look of a woman who has concluded a chapter and is already thinking about the next one. She said, "You thought my silence meant I had nothing. It meant I had already decided." She walked out. Her attorneys followed. The door closed behind them with a sound that was barely a sound at all. In the elevator on the way down, Tiffany stared at the floor numbers changing above the door. She told Marcus she needed some time to think. He nodded. She never called him again. Her things were gone from his apartment before the week was out. The weeks that followed were quiet for Marcus, in the way that financial unraveling is always quiet at first, like a structure that has already lost its foundation but hasn't yet decided to fall. People don't rush toward a falling building. They move away, carefully, without making a fuss, in the direction of something more stable. That's what his business world did. It moved away from him, quietly and with its eyes down, the way people exit a room when they sense something is ending. What Marcus had never fully accounted for was how much of his business had been held together by Lenora's invisible work, the vendor relationships she had built on his behalf over years, the investors she had personally cultivated through dinners he didn't attend and calls he didn't make, the financial management that had kept his company clean and solvent during 3 years when it shouldn't have survived. Without her, those threads began to loosen one by one. Key contracts went unrenewed. 2 major investors who had always quietly trusted Lenora's financial read on the company, more than Marcus's charm, withdrew within the same quarter. The company's anchor partnership, the one that had stabilized everything, went to a competitor at the next renewal. Marcus downsized, then downsized again. He sold the car he had bought to impress Tiffany. He moved into a smaller apartment south of the city. He sat in that apartment some evenings and thought about the woman who had sat across from him at a dining table in a white robe and slid a single page across the surface without raising her voice. And he understood, too late and too clearly, what he had thrown away. He called her once, 6 months after the conference room. The phone rang 4 times, voicemail. He hung up without leaving a message. He never called again. Beverly faced the civil suit with the urgency of someone who had not believed it was coming until it arrived. Her attorneys told her to settle. She did. Quietly, at a significant financial cost, and with a non-disclosure agreement that prevented her from speaking publicly about Lenora Washington or any member of the Washington family ever again. She signed it on a Wednesday morning and left the building without making eye contact with anyone in the lobby. Gloria called Lenora 6 months later. It was a Sunday evening. Gloria was crying, not the theatrical kind, but the low, private kind that comes from a person who has been holding something too heavy for too long. Her marriage was already showing the fractures that form in a foundation built on the willingness to betray. Her husband had sensed something in her. He couldn't name it exactly, but it was there, the shape of a woman who had looked away when she should have spoken. And that sense had put a distance between them that all the affection in the world hadn't been able to close. There is a particular loneliness, Gloria was discovering, that comes from living with someone who senses but cannot name the thing they sense in you. It is worse in many ways than being alone, because alone is honest. And Gloria had chosen dishonesty, and now she was living inside the shape of it. Lenora answered. She listened to her sister's voice for a long time without interrupting. She didn't make sounds of comfort or agreement. She just listened, the way she had always listened, completely, without performance. She heard the guilt in Gloria's voice alongside the grief. She heard the way her sister wanted absolution and also knew she hadn't earned it yet. She heard all of it, and she held it without letting it pull her back into something she had already finished grieving. When Gloria finished, Lenora was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You know what you did, Gloria, and you know what it cost us. I forgive you, but I can't carry you anymore." She said it without cruelty. She said it the way you close a door gently when you're leaving a room you've already made peace with leaving. Then she said goodnight and ended the call. Lenora bought a house outside Atlanta 6 months after the divorce was finalized. Not enormous, not a statement. A comfortable house with warm-toned rooms and a back porch that faced a wide-open field where the light changed color 3 times a day, depending on where the sun was. She put a rocking chair on that porch. She planted a garden along the south side of the yard, tomatoes and basil and 2 fig trees she had brought from Birmingham in the bed of a truck, wrapped in burlap to survive the drive. She established the Adeline Washington Foundation formally in the spring. Its mission was financial education, legal aid, and business development for Black women across the South. She ran it without press releases, without announcements, without a social media presence or a publicist or a ribbon-cutting ceremony. The foundation simply opened its doors in 3 cities and began doing the work. Word traveled the way important things always travel, person to person, quietly, through communities that recognize real help when it shows up. Within the first year, the foundation had served over 2,000 women. It had helped launch 14 small businesses. It had provided legal representation in 43 cases where women had been cheated out of what was rightfully theirs. Every single one of those cases was won. Nobody wrote a newspaper story about it. Lenora didn't need them to. She was finally living at the exact volume she had always been meant to live at. One morning in early spring, she sat on the back porch with a cup of coffee warming both her hands. The field behind her house was going green, the way Georgia fields go green in April, all at once, like the ground remembered something overnight. The light was coming in at an angle that made the fig tree leaves look like stained glass. A bird she didn't know the name of was singing somewhere in the tree line. The air smelled like soil and something faintly sweet. It was the kind of morning that asks nothing of you, the kind that simply offers itself and waits to see if you can receive it. Lenora had spent so many years in the kind of life that couldn't afford a morning like this one. Too busy, too tense, too occupied with the work of maintaining something that was slowly falling apart. That she sat in this one slowly, deliberately, the way you sit with something valuable that you almost lost and somehow didn't. She reached up and held the compass rose pendant between two fingers. She turned it slightly. She thought about Elder Cornelius on the porch in Birmingham. She thought about Adeline, a small woman in a white dress, looking at a camera without flinching, building something permanent in the middle of a world that kept telling her she couldn't. She thought about the journal with the tight, careful handwriting. She thought about what it meant to move quiet and move things. She thought about how long it had taken her to understand that her great-grandmother had already written the map, and she had been wearing it around her neck her whole life. She put the pendant back against her chest. She picked up her coffee. She breathed in the steam and the spring air together. She looked out at the field, and she let herself be exactly, finally, fully at peace. If you know a woman who needs to hear this today, share it with her without a word, just like Lenora would. I'll see you in the next story. Stay blessed.